I never imagined that a simple, almost forgettable visit from my husband's boss would leave such a lasting imprint on me. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon. One of those calm stretches of time where nothing stands out. Where life simply moves forward without demanding attention. And yet, that day awakened something inside me. Something I hadn't even known was dormant. When the doorbell rang, I felt it instantly, a subtle tightening in my chest, an unexpected blend of curiosity and unease. It was strange, almost irrational. But impossible to ignore. Before continuing, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and let us know in the comments which city you're listening from. Your support truly matters. Now let's continue. It was mid-October. The kind of day where the air carries a crisp edge. But sunlight still pours warmly through the windows, softening everything it touches. Henry was still at the office, held back by a meeting that had stretched far longer than usual. I had been tidying the house slowly, not out of compulsion, but because the routine steadied me. There's comfort in small, deliberate motions, sweeping floors, straightening cushions. Simple acts that give structure to an otherwise quiet day. So when I opened the door and saw Arthur standing there, I was genuinely surprised. Henry had mentioned him before, of course, but always in distant terms, a superior, a presence felt more than known. In person, he appeared slightly older than I'd imagined, his hair threaded with gray, his posture composed and self-assured. He carried himself with a quiet authority, yet there was nothing cold about him. "Linda," he said, his voice gentle in a way I hadn't expected. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside. Something in his tone disarmed me. It wasn't demanding or formal, it was considerate. That contradiction lingered with me, making me feel both guarded and at ease. We sat in the living room as sunlight spilled across the furniture, filling the space with a warm, amber glow. I offered him tea, which he accepted with a nod. As I poured, I noticed the way his eyes moved around the room. Not assessing, not judging, but observing. As though he were reading the story of the space, noticing the small details that reveal how a life is lived. "This feels like a real home," he said quietly after his first sip. "Henry often talks about how you've a way of making a place feel alive." The compliment caught me off guard. I smiled, feeling a soft warmth rise in my chest, an emotion I hadn't experienced in a long time. It had been years since someone outside my immediate world had acknowledged my efforts so plainly. I hadn't realized how much that validation still mattered to me. At first, our conversation stayed light. We talked about books, the changing season, the subtle shifts in the neighborhood. But gradually, without either of us pushing it, the dialogue deepened. It felt as though an unseen current was guiding us toward more personal waters. Arthur spoke about his past, decades spent climbing professional ladders, the successes that came with sacrifice, and the regrets that lingered quietly beneath achievement. I listened, genuinely moved by his honesty. In turn, I found myself sharing pieces of my own life. Raising a family, the invisible labor of holding a household together, the quiet victories no one applauds, and the moments when I wondered who I might have become under different circumstances. What struck me most was the way he listened. Not passively. Not politely. But with intention. With presence. It felt rare, almost intimate, to be heard that way, to feel seen not as a role but as a person. Time slipped away unnoticed. The sun lowered in the sky, stretching long shadows across the room, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, balanced between familiarity and something new. Something unnamed, quietly waiting to be acknowledged. I never imagined that something as ordinary as a visit from my husband's boss could leave such a lasting imprint on me. It was supposed to be an unremarkable afternoon, one of those gentle stretches of time where nothing asks to be remembered. And yet, that day awakened something I hadn't even realized had been dormant. When the doorbell rang, a strange sensation settled in my chest. An uneasy blend of curiosity and restraint, like a thought you don't quite dare to finish. It felt out of place, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. It was mid-October, the kind of day balanced delicately between warmth and chill. Sunlight poured through the windows, soft and golden, while the air carried a quiet sharpness that hinted at change. Henry was still at the office, caught in a meeting that had stretched longer than usual. And I had been moving slowly through the house, tidying without urgency. I've always found comfort in order, not as a compulsion, but as a way to feel anchored, useful, present. I wasn't expecting company. Certainly not Arthur. When I opened the door, he stood there with a composed stillness that immediately filled the space between us. He looked older than I had imagined, yet there was something undeniably steady about him. His silver-streaked hair was neatly combed back, his jacket perfectly tailored. But it was his expression that disarmed me. Formal, yes, but softened by an unmistakable warmth. "Linda," he said gently, almost cautiously. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside. His voice carried a kindness that didn't demand attention, it invited it. That alone unsettled me more than I expected. Inside, we settled into the living room as sunlight itself across the furniture. I offered him tea. He accepted. As I poured, I noticed the way his eyes moved through the room, not critically, not accently, but attentively. As if he were reading the quiet story of the life lived there. "You've made this home feel alive," he said after a sip. "Henry often mentions how you have that gift." The words caught me off guard. I smiled, feeling a warmth bloom in my chest, pride, perhaps. Or simply the feeling of being acknowledged. It had been a long time since someone had seen me beyond my roles, beyond routine. At first, our conversation stayed safely surface, level, books, weather, the slow changes in the neighborhood. But gradually, almost without notice, it shifted. Stories replaced small talk. Meaning replaced politeness. Arthur spoke of his past, years spent chasing success, the quiet cost of ambition. The things he wished he had understood sooner. And without planning to, I found myself sharing pieces of my own life, motherhood. The invisible labor of keeping a family afloat, the rare moments when I felt like more than the sum of my responsibilities. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush me. He listened with a presence that felt rare, almost intimate in its sincerity. Time slipped quietly away. The sun sank lower, painting the room in amber and shadow. I became aware of Henry's absence, but I was also aware of something else, a subtle connection forming in the space between words. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. A meeting of two people acknowledging the weight of their own unspoken lives. Arthur shared a childhood memory then. A simple story about his father, a lesson in humility that had followed him for decades. I laughed softly, genuinely, and felt a gentle warmth spread through me. In that moment, I understood how the smallest exchanges can carry the deepest emotional resonance. When Henry finally came home, the room felt altered. Though nothing had physically changed, there was a quiet depth lingering, an emotional echo. Henry greeted us cheerfully, unaware of the shift that had taken place, and I felt no guilt, only gratitude for a conversation that had reminded me what it felt like to be truly seen. As evening settled in, Arthur stood to leave. Our goodbye was simple, sincere. A promise to stay in touch that felt natural, not polite. Watching him step into the cool dusk, I realized how unexpectedly life offers moments of clarity. How a single visit, a single conversation, can quietly realign something inside you. The next morning arrived crisp and bright. I lingered by the window longer than usual, coffee warming my hands. My thoughts returning, not obsessively, but thoughtfully, to the day before. Arthur himself wasn't the focus. It was the feeling he left behind. The rare comfort of being heard in a world that so often rushes past understanding. Henry moved around the kitchen, humming softly, unaware of the quiet shift within me. And as I watched the morning light stretch across the room, I felt lighter, more present, keenly aware of the fragile, beautiful weight of human connection inside me. Henry had always been like that, fully immersed in whatever task was in front of him, steady and reliable, yet largely untouched by the quieter undercurrents that shape emotional life. There was comfort in that simplicity. Sometimes I even envied it. But I knew, with a certainty that had followed me for years, that I was not built the same way. Later that morning, my phone vibrated softly against the counter. A message from Arthur. It was brief, restrained, almost polite, yet it carried far more weight than its few words suggested. "Linda, I hope the tea was as pleasant for you as it was for me. Thank you for sharing your stories yesterday. They stayed with me longer than I expected." My breath caught in a way that surprised me. I read it twice, then once more. When I typed my reply, a simple thank you felt sufficient, even necessary. But my fingers hovered over the screen before I finally sent it. That pause held something delicate, restraint mixed with recognition. There was no drama in that exchange, no declaration or intent. And yet, it stirred something undeniable. A reminder that connection does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it moves quietly, like a ripple across still water, easy to overlook, impossible to forget once noticed. As the day unfolded, I found myself distracted in unfamiliar ways. I moved through my routines, completing tasks almost on instinct, while my thoughts drifted elsewhere. I remembered the calm rhythm of Arthur's voice, the way he had noticed details most people passed over without thought. The photographs along the mantel. The faint scent of jasmine lingering in the room, the care I had taken arranging the teacups. It wasn't admiration that lingered. It was attention. A respectful noticing of small, ordinary things. Things that suddenly felt meaningful simply because they had been seen. When Henry came home that afternoon, I tried to ease myself back into the familiarity of our shared routines. Dinner plans, errands, small inconveniences that filled the space between us. He sensed something, I'm sure of it. He always does, even when he pretends not to. But he didn't ask, and I didn't offer. There was no tension between us, only within me. I found myself wondering how one holds onto a moment of understanding without allowing it to disturb the life already built so carefully around them. How does something so fleeting manage to feel so persistent? By mid-afternoon, I was sitting at my writing desk, pulling open a notebook I hadn't touched in months. The pages were blank, waiting, patient. Yesterday's visit had stirred something old and familiar. The need to record, to give shape to feelings before they dissolved into silence. I wrote about the way sunlight had spilled through the living room windows, illuminating the smallest imperfections in the furniture, and how those imperfections had seemed beautiful once someone took the time to notice them. I wrote about tea shared in unhurried conversation. About the unexpected realization that being truly heard can feel startling, almost explosive. Like something gently breaking open inside the soul. And as the pen moved across the page, I understood that some moments don't ask to change your life, they simply ask to be acknowledged. Hours slipped by in quiet contemplation. The house filled only with the faint rhythm of Henry's humming drifting from another room. The stillness felt intentional, almost protective. Then, in the late afternoon, the doorbell rang again. My heart responded before my mind could. It was Arthur. I hadn't expected to see him so soon. And yet his presence felt strangely inevitable, like a conversation paused mid-sentence, finally resuming. He stepped inside with the same measured grace as before. Though this time there was a trace of tension in his posture, a hesitation that softened his authority and revealed something unmistakably human. "Linda," he said gently, as if weighing the moment itself. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I replied, surprising myself with how easily the words came. I gestured for him to sit, the kettle was still warm. And as I poured the tea, I sensed that we would not circle back through polite pleasantries. We didn't need to, we picked up where we had left off. The conversation moved deeper, effortlessly so, yet carried a weight that made me acutely aware of every word exchanged. Arthur spoke of his own quiet battles, of years spent being visible yet unseen, respected yet misunderstood. He spoke of the slow, often painful realization that success means little without genuine connection, and how learning to recognize what truly matters had come at a cost. I listened, then found myself responding in kind. I spoke of the loneliness that can exist even within a full, bustling life. Of how isolation doesn't always announce itself loudly, but settles in quietly, between responsibilities and routines. I shared the small victories that sustain me, patience practiced daily, kindness offered without expectation, understanding earned slowly over time. Each exchange felt deliberate, careful. Trust unfolded not through confession, but through recognition. It became clear that this was no ordinary visit. It was the rare meeting of two lives unexpectedly aligned, resonating on the same unspoken frequency. As the sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the floor, I felt a shift within myself. There was no boundary crossed, no hidden intention. Only the profound awareness that meaningful connection is uncommon, and therefore precious. Arthur's presence illuminated parts of me long overlooked. Aspects of my identity quietly waiting to be acknowledged. In recognizing them, I felt a subtle renewal, a gentle waken that carried both comfort and a quiet, unsettling excitement. When it was time for him to leave, Arthur lingered by the door, as though reluctant to disturb the fragile stillness of the afternoon. "Linda," he said softly, "thank you. Truly, I look forward to seeing you again." The warmth in his eyes lent the words a depth that far exceeded their simplicity. As I watched him step into the cooling air, reflection settled over me like a slow tide. Life, I realized, has a way of offering moments without warning. Moments of connection so unexpected, so quietly powerful, that they leave a lasting imprint long after the door has closed. Not in drama or scandal, but in the quiet, transformative recognition of one human being by another. As I closed the door and leaned against it, I understood something with startling clarity. Yesterday had not been an ending. It had been beginning. The days that followed slipped into an unexpected rhythm, one neither Henry nor I could have anticipated. Arthur's visits were no longer frequent, yet each carried intention. They were never casual, never accidental. And each time I knew he was coming, a subtle anticipation settled in my chest. It wasn't nervousness, it wasn't quiet stirring. A gentle tension that hinted at possibilities I had long forgotten were even possible. It was on a gray Thursday afternoon that the shift between us became undeniable. The sky hung low and heavy, thick with clouds, and the air carried the sharp scent of impending rain. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes from lunch, when the doorbell rang. My heart reacted before my thoughts could catch up. Arthur. I knew it instantly. When I opened the door, he stood there slightly damp from the drizzle, his coat clinging to him in a way that stripped away formality and revealed something deeply human in his composed exterior. "Linda," he said softly, his voice carrying the same warmth as the rain outside. "I hope I'm not imposing again." "Not at all," I replied, stepping aside. "You don't need to apologize for visiting." We settled into the living room, where the muted daylight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft gray glow over everything it touched. There was something different about him that day. A vulnerability lingered in his expression, quiet, restrained but unmistakable. It invited trust without asking for it. I poured the tea, and for a moment we sat in silence, letting the stillness speak where words were unnecessary. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," Arthur finally said. His gaze was steady, yet introspective. "About the parts of ourselves we rarely share." He paused, choosing his words with care. "I've come to realize how rare it is to meet someone who truly listens, Linda. I don't take that lightly." The words settled deep inside me, stirring something I hadn't felt in years, a mix of recognition and relief. Here was a man shaped by authority and responsibility, by time and experience, giving voice to a truth I had carried silently for far too long: the human need to be seen, genuinely seen, without expectation or demand. "Arthur," I said quietly, "I feel the same. It is rare, isn't it, to connect like this, without hidden motives." Our eyes met, and in that moment, nothing else mattered, no titles, no roles. Just two people acknowledging the quiet truth between them. And I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't fleeting. It was something delicate, intentional, and profoundly human, unfolding not with urgency, but with care. He nodded, a faint smile appearing at the corners of his mouth. "Rare," he said softly. "Yes. And yet here we are." The conversation unfolded slowly, deliberately, as though neither of us wanted to rush what was taking shape between us. We spoke of our pasts, not with urgency or confession, but with reflection. Nothing was demanded, everything was offered gently. Arthur shared fragments of his life shaped by both success and regret. He spoke of achievements that had once defined him, and the quiet sacrifices that had accompanied them. In his words, I heard not authority, but humanity. It made me feel less isolated in my own experiences, less alone in the emotions I had long carried silently. When it was my turn, I spoke of Henry, of the steady rhythm of our days together, of the comfort found in routine, the beauty of small familiar gestures, the satisfaction of creating a home that felt warm and lived in. And then, almost without intending to, I spoke of the subtle ache beneath it all, the longing to be truly understood, not just known. A pause followed. Delicate, heavy, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full. In that moment, it struck me with quiet clarity, this was no longer casual conversation. This was something deeper, an emotional communion. A meeting of minds and hearts that existed beyond the ordinary flow of life. Arthur leaned back slightly, resting his hands loosely in his lap. His voice lowered when he spoke. "Linda, I value this," he said, "more than I can properly explain. It feels as though I've been carrying a weight for years, one I never fully understood. Talking with you, it's like I can finally set some of it down. Even if only for a moment." A sudden sting pricked the corner of my eye, catching me off guard with its intensity. "I understand," I whispered. "It's the same for me. To feel recognized, to feel truly understood, it's a gift I didn't realize I needed so badly." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, tapping against the windows in a gentle rhythm. The sound wrapped around us, creating a sense of privacy, as though the world beyond a ruin had faded away. Time slowed. Or perhaps we simply stopped noticing it. I became aware, for the first time, of how deeply Arthur's presence affected me, not through grand gestures, but in quiet ways. The warmth of his gaze, the steadiness of his voice, the patience in the way he listened without interruption or judgment. It wasn't desire in the conventional sense. It was recognition. That rare, profound acknowledgement that comes when one soul truly touches another. We talked for hours. Some moments were light, punctuated by soft laughter, others were heavier, filled with reflection. And throughout it all, I felt an unfamiliar sense of safety, a trust that allowed me to explore parts of myself I had hidden, even from Henry. Parts that yearned not for escape, but for understanding, for connection, for being seen. As evening settled in, Arthur rose to leave. His movements were careful, almost measured, as though he were reluctant to disturb the delicate stillness the afternoon had created. He paused near the door and looked at me with quiet sincerity. "Linda," he said softly, "thank you, truly. You've reminded me that even in a life weighed down by responsibility and expectation, there is still room for genuine human connection, for real understanding." I watched as he stepped out into the rain, his figure gradually fading along the path toward the street. As the door closed behind him, a sense of reflection washed over me. Life, I realized, has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Even the simplest visit, the most unassuming conversation, can carry the weight of discovery, of growth, of emotional awakening. And with that realization came a feeling I hadn't known in years. I felt lighter, more present, more alive. The days that followed Arthur's last visit were quieter, yet the silence felt different now, textured, almost meaningful. Life slipped back into its familiar rhythm with Henry, shared breakfasts, routine errands, evenings marked by tea and calm conversation. Nothing outwardly had changed, and yet beneath the surface, something within me had shifted. I carried with me a quiet awareness, an understanding that even within ordinary life, extraordinary moments could emerge if one remained open to them. One morning, as I arranged flowers in the living room, I found my thoughts drifting back to Arthur. Not in a way that disrupted my marriage, but in a way that honored the depth of what we had shared. There was a serenity in our connection, a mutual respect and understanding that reminded me how deeply it matters to be truly seen. It wasn't something easily explained, but it settled inside me like sunlight streaming gently through a window. Later that afternoon, a soft knock sounded at the door. For a brief moment, my heart fluttered, as it always seemed to when he appeared, but I took a steady breath before opening it. Arthur stood there, holding a small envelope. His expression was calm, thoughtful. "Linda," he said quietly as he stepped inside, "I wanted to leave this with you. Just a note, nothing more. Unless you wish it to be." I accepted the envelope, aware of its presence in my hands. It didn't feel heavy, it felt symbolic. An extension of the bond we had formed, gentle, honest, respectful. "Thank you, Arthur," I replied softly. "You've brought a clarity and peace into my life that I didn't know I was missing." He smiled, that familiar warmth returning to his eyes. The same warmth that had once unsettled me and then slowly brought comfort. "It's mutual," he said. "Sometimes we meet people who quietly remind us of what truly matters. You've done that for me, Linda." We stood there for a moment, sharing a silence that needed no explanation. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured through the windows, casting golden streaks across the room and illuminating the furniture in a soft glow. In that stillness, I understood something with gentle certainty. Not all meaningful connections are meant to disrupt our lives. Some exist simply to awaken us, to remind us of who we are, and who we still have the capacity to become. The photographs, the small imperfections that had quietly become symbols of a life fully lived. In that moment, I understood what truly mattered. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but the acknowledgement of experience. The simple recognition of our shared humanity, and the respect for the quiet truths that shape each of our lives. Arthur left shortly afterward, carrying with him a calm assurance that lingered in the room, long after the door had closed. The air felt lighter, yet subtly charged with meaning. I leaned against the door for a moment, reflecting on how a visit so unassuming, one that could have been ordinary, fleeting, even forgettable, had reshaped my understanding of connection. In the weeks that followed, I carried the memory of our conversations with me. Not as a secret, and certainly not as temptation, but as a reminder of what genuine human connection can offer. Life with Henry continued as it always had, yet something within me had softened. I found myself more patient, more present, more appreciative of the small gestures and silent understandings that quietly bind a life together. There was a new clarity in my heart. A realization that emotional fulfillment does not always arrive through sweeping moments or dramatic change. More often, it comes quietly, in shared laughter, in attentive listening, in the rare gift of being truly seen. One evening, as Henry and I sat side by side on the porch, watching the sun slip below the horizon, I felt the weight of that realization settle gently within me. I was deeply grateful for my marriage, for the life we had built together, for the companionship that had grown steadier and richer with time. And alongside that gratitude was a renewed respect for myself, for the parts of me that had been acknowledged, nurtured, and expanded through an unexpected connection. I understood then that life has a subtle yet remarkable way of reminding us what truly matters: a simple visit, a thoughtful conversation, a moment of recognition. These are the experiences that leave lasting impressions. They teach us empathy, deepen our respect for one another, and reveal the quiet power of emotional connection. Most of all, they remind us that even later in life, there is still room for discovery, for growth, for meaningful human engagement. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, a gentle peace settled over me. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic transformations, only the quiet knowledge that life becomes richer when we allow ourselves to be truly seen, and when we honor the connections that touch us deeply. Arthur's visit, so simple on the surface, had carried immense weight, not in ways the world could measure, but in ways the heart understands. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the cool evening air against my skin, and smiled softly. Life had offered me a quiet reminder. The heart never truly stops learning, and the deepest connections often arrive when we least expect them. And in that understanding, I felt whole, grateful, grounded, and profoundly at peace.